The Galactic Council thought they knew everything about warfare. They had cataloged every known military strategy across 10,000 worlds, documented the rise and fall of 1,000,000 civilizations, and believed themselves the ultimate arbiters of cosmic conflict. Their databases contained the tactical genius of the crystalline Vorthan Empire, the berserker fury of the gas giant dwellers of Proxima 7, and the hive-mind coordination of the insectoid Klaxon Confederacy. But they had never encountered a species that turned their greatest weaknesses into their most terrifying strengths. They had never met humanity. When the first human ship limped into Galactic Council space, bleeding atmosphere and trailing debris, the Council's xenobiologists dismissed them as another primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. Humans were soft-bodied, short-lived, and lacked the natural weapons, armor, or telepathic abilities that marked truly dangerous civilizations. They seemed destined to become another client species, perhaps useful as laborers or entertainment. The Council's first mistake was underestimating human curiosity. Their second mistake was threatening human children. Their third and final mistake was declaring war. What followed would be remembered across the galaxy as the shortest, most devastating conflict in recorded history. Not because humanity possessed superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but because they possessed something far more dangerous: the ability to adapt, evolve, and weaponize absolutely anything, including their own apparent limitations. This is the story of how a species deemed harmlessly primitive brought the greatest galactic empire to its knees, and why every military academy in the known universe now teaches a single, fundamental rule. Never underestimate a species that turned persistence hunting into an art form, cooperation into a science, and spite into a weapon of mass destruction. The *U's Endeavor drifted through space like a wounded animal, her hull scarred by micrometeorites, and patched with whatever materials the crew could scavenge from dead systems. Captain Sarah Chen watched the approaching alien vessel through the bridge's cracked viewport, her weathered hands steady on the helm controls despite the ship's failing artificial gravity making everything feel slightly off-kilter. "Ma'am, they're hailing us," reported Lieutenant Marcus Webb from the communications station, his voice tight with exhaustion. The crew had been pushing their dying ship for 3 months, ever since the reactor breach that had forced them to abandon their colony mission and seek help in uncharted space. "Put them through," Chen ordered, straightening her torn uniform. First contact protocols seemed almost laughably formal given their circumstances, but she'd be damned if humanity's introduction to galactic civilization started with poor manners. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a crystal formation. Its faceted eyes regarded them with what might have been amusement, though reading alien expressions was impossible. When it spoke, the universal translator that had somehow survived their various catastrophes rendered its clicking speech into precise, clinical English. "Greetings, primitive vessel. I am Sub-Administrator Clixforth of the Galactic Council Survey Ship * Contemplation of Order. Your crude propulsion signature has been detected violating Council-controlled space. Prepare to be boarded for processing." Chen exchanged glances with her bridge crew. She'd been a military officer before accepting this colony mission, and she recognized the tone of someone used to absolute obedience. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship * Endeavor. We're experiencing critical system failures and request assistance under standard interstellar aid protocols." The alien's mandibles clicked in what the translator interpreted as laughter. "Assistance? Your species designation is unknown to our databases, which means you are either per-contact primitives or refugees from some failed civilization. Either way, you have no claim to Council protection or aid. Your vessel will be impounded, your technology cataloged, and your biological distinctiveness studied. If you prove useful, you may be granted client species status." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Chen's crew had left Earth with dreams of establishing humanity's first extrasolar colony, of proving that their species could thrive among the stars. Instead, they'd stumbled into what sounded like a galactic protection racket. "With respect," Chen said carefully, "we're representatives of a sovereign species seeking peaceful contact. We're not looking for trouble, just help getting our ship operational and safe passage home." "Sovereignty is earned, not claimed," Clixforth replied dismissively. Your ship's technology is primitive, your crew lacks any notable psychic abilities, and your biology shows no advantageous adaptations. By what right do you claim equality with species that have evolved beyond your comprehension? Webb leaned forward in his seat. Captain, their ship is powering weapons. Chen felt the familiar calm that had served her through countless military engagements settle over her mind. All hands, prepare for potential hostile contact, and Webb, start recording everything for the black box. On screen, Clicksforth continued its monologue with the casual arrogance of absolute power. Do not resist. Your crude weapons cannot harm Council vessels, and any aggression will result in your immediate destruction rather than processing. The Council has eliminated countless species for less provocation then. The alien stopped mid-sentence as new contacts appeared on both ships' sensors. 3 more vessels materialized from what appeared to be empty space, their sleek forms dwarfing even the Council ship. These newcomers bore no resemblance to the crystalline insectoids. Instead, they seemed to be made of living metal that flowed and shifted like mercury. Sub-Administrator, came a new voice over the comm, this one rendered by the translator as smooth and emotionless. You exceed your authority. This system has been claimed by the hegemony under Expansion Protocol 77 Alpha. Withdraw immediately. Clicksforth's entire demeanor changed, the casual arrogance replaced by something that looked like fear. Hegemon, we detected no-claim beacons. Our sensors showed only empty space and a primitive derelict. Your sensors are inferior. The derelict belongs to an uncatalogued species. As per hegemony law, first contact rights belong to us. Withdraw or be removed. Chen watched this exchange with growing unease. Her ship was apparently the prize in some sort of interstellar territorial dispute, and neither side seemed particularly concerned with humanity's opinion on the matter. Now wait just a damn minute, she said, loud enough for both alien ships to hear. We're not a derelict. We're not anyone's property, and we sure as hell don't belong to either of you. We came here seeking help, not looking to be claimed like some piece of salvage. Both alien voices fell silent for a moment. Then Clicksforth made that clicking laugh again. The primitive speaks as if its opinion matters. How amusing. The hegemony voice remained emotionless. Curious. The creature displays unexpected cognitive function. Perhaps it would make an interesting specimen for the breeding programs. That was the wrong thing to say. Chen had seen too many good people die defending human colonies from raiders and xenophobic factions to tolerate threats against her crew, even from beings with technology that could probably vaporize her ship without effort. Lieutenant Martinez, she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the screen, what's the status on our missile tubes? Ma'am, we've got 6 nuclear warheads left in the forward tubes, but guidance systems are offline, and the firing mechanism is running on backup power, came the reply from her weapons officer, a young woman who joined the crew fresh from the Mars Naval Academy. And our reactors? Containment fields failing, but we've got maybe 30 minutes before total breach, reported the engineering station. Chen smiled grimly. Then we've got nothing to lose, open a channel to both ships. She waited for Webb's nod. This is Captain Chen. I'm going to explain something about humans that you might want to add to your databases. We don't do well with threats, we don't surrender to bullies, and we sure as hell don't let anyone talk about using us for breeding programs. Clicksforth's mandibles clicked rapidly. Your posturing is meaningless. Surrender now or we will take your ship by force. You know what? Chen stood up from her command chair, ignoring the way the failing gravity made her stumble slightly. We've been running on emergency power for 3 months, living on recycled air and synthesized protein paste, watching our ship die around us piece by piece. We've already lost everything we came out here to build, so let me make you both a counteroffer. She gestured to Webb, who began transmitting their ship's technical readouts to both alien vessels. Our reactor containment is failing. In approximately 28 minutes, this ship is going to become a very large, very radioactive explosion. Our missiles might not be able to track you, but they don't need to if we detonate them at point-blank range. So here's what's going to happen. You're both going to back off to a safe distance. You're going to give us the technical specifications we need to repair our containment field. And then we're going to have a civilized conversation about establishing peaceful relations. Impossible, the hegemony voice said. Council technology is centuries ahead of your capabilities. You cannot threaten us with primitive weapons. Chen's smile became predatory. You're thinking like civilized beings. That's your first mistake. We're humans. When we're cornered, we don't get civilized. We get creative. Martinez, show them what happens when desperate humans stop caring about their own survival. The weapons officer's fingers danced over her controls, and suddenly the Endeavour *S missile tubes opened, revealing the dull metal casings of their remaining nuclear warheads. But these weren't standard military ordnance anymore. Months of jury-rigging and creative engineering had turned them into something far more dangerous. Improvised nuclear-shaped charges surrounded by every piece of radioactive material the ship could spare, from depleted uranium shielding to the radioactive waste from their failing medical bay. "Those are dirty bombs," Chen announced conversationally. "Each one carries enough radioactive material to contaminate a ship your size for about 50 years. Sure, you'll probably survive the initial blast, but I bet your crew won't enjoy slowly dying from radiation poisoning. And here's the really fun part. Our torpedo tubes are jury-rigged to our failing reactor. When it goes critical, those warheads detonate automatically. So you can have us as friends who are grateful for your help, or you can have us as a radioactive problem that follows you home." The silence that followed was deafening. Chen could practically hear the aliens processing this information, trying to figure out if the crazy humans were bluffing. They weren't, of course. Martinez had done excellent work turning their desperate situation into a weapon, because that's what humans did. They adapted. Finally, Clicksforth spoke, its voice noticeably less confident than before. "You would destroy yourselves to spite us. If that's what it takes to make sure you remember not to mess with the next humans you meet," Chen replied cheerfully. "Though I'd rather we all walked away from this as friends. Your choice." Another long silence. Then the hegemony ship began withdrawing to a safer distance, followed reluctantly by the council vessel. "This exchange will be reported to higher authorities," Clicksforth warned. "If your species proves troublesome, the council has methods of dealing with such problems." "Looking forward to meeting them," Chen said. "Now about those repair specifications." 3 hours later, the Endeavour *S reactor hummed with renewed stability, her crew working frantically to restore damaged systems using blueprints that their new alien friends had been persuaded to share. Chen stood on the bridge, watching both alien ships maintain their wary distance, and couldn't help but feel proud of her people. They'd just made first contact with galactic civilization, and they'd done it on human terms, not as supplicants or victims, but as equals who demanded respect. It probably wasn't the diplomatic triumph the folks back home had imagined, but it was distinctly, undeniably human. "Ma'am," Webb called from his station, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. Apparently our distress beacon made it through the relay network before it failed." "Put it through." Admiral Rodriguez's weathered face appeared on screen, his expression grim. "Sarah, thank God you're alive. We've got a problem. 3 days ago, alien ships appeared in the Tau Ceti system and demanded the immediate surrender of our colony there. When Governor Hassan refused, they destroyed the orbital station and blockaded the planet. We're looking at the conquest of 15,000 colonists, including 800 children." Chen felt her blood turn to ice. "Admiral, we've made contact with what appears to be the same group. They call themselves the Galactic Council, and they don't recognize human sovereignty. They seem to think we're primitives who should be grateful for client species status." Rodriguez's face hardened. "Then they're about to learn why that's a mistake. Sarah, I'm ordering you to gather as much intelligence as possible about their technology and capabilities. We're mobilizing the fleet, but we need to know what we're up against." "Understood, sir. And Admiral, these aliens think humans are weak because we don't have natural weapons or psychic powers. They have no idea what they're dealing with." As the transmission ended, Chen looked out at the alien ships and smiled. The galaxy was about to get a very expensive education in human nature. The Council thought they were dealing with another primitive species that would roll over when threatened. They were about to discover why humans had a saying, "Mess with the bull, get the horns." The war hadn't started yet, but the first shot had already been fired when they threatened human children. Everything that followed was just the galaxy learning what humanity meant when they said, "Never again." Chen began composing her intelligence report, documenting everything they'd learned about Council technology and tactics. Back home, the greatest military minds in human space would be analyzing every detail, looking for weaknesses to exploit and advantages to press. The aliens had started this confrontation thinking they were dealing with primitives. They were about to find out what happened when those primitives had nuclear weapons, military training, and absolutely nothing left to lose. High Admiral Thorin of the Galactic Council Fleet regarded the holographic display with what his species approximated as satisfaction. The blue-white sphere of Earth hung suspended in the center of his command chamber aboard the dreadnought Inevitable Conclusion, surrounded by tactical data that painted a picture of complete Council superiority. 300 Council warships formed a perfect sphere around humanity's homeworld, each vessel representing technological advancement that should have rendered human resistance impossible. The aliens had ray shields that could deflect nuclear weapons, faster-than-light communication that allowed perfect coordination, and energy weapons that could crack continents. By every measure that mattered to galactic civilization, this should have been over before it began. Yet something was wrong. "Report from the Tau Ceti blockade," announced his aide, a nervous Korthani whose blue-scaled skin had turned pale with stress. "Admiral Skelvash reports increasing difficulties maintaining orbital control." "Difficulties?" Thorin's four arms gestured in the complex pattern that indicated controlled irritation. "Explain these difficulties. The humans possess no orbital defense platforms, no fleet presence in that system, and their ground-based weapons are primitive chemical propulsion systems." The aide's scales shifted to an even paler shade. "The humans are adapting, High Admiral. They have been launching projectiles from the planet's surface using electromagnetic accelerators built from mining equipment. The projectiles carry no explosive payload, but they are traveling at significant fractions of light speed and targeting our ship's heat sinks and sensor arrays." Thorin's secondary brain processed this information, while his primary mind dealt with rising confusion. Heat sinks are internal components protected by multiple layers of armor. How are primitive kinetic weapons reaching them? The humans appear to be constructing their projectiles from materials that fragment at specific distances, creating debris clouds that overwhelm point defense systems. When our ships maneuver to avoid the primary impact, the fragments strike cooling vents and sensor ports with precise timing. The High Admiral's tertiary arms began the gesture for profound bewilderment. In 3,000 years of warfare, the Council had never encountered an enemy that turned mining equipment into orbital weapons platforms. Have the humans somehow acquired advanced targeting computers? No, High Admiral. Intelligence analysis suggests they are using teams of mathematicians to manually calculate trajectories, accounting for orbital mechanics, ship movements, and debris dispersion patterns. Each shot requires approximately 4 hours of preparation, but their accuracy is unprecedented. 4 hours of manual calculations to achieve what Council computers could do in nanoseconds, yet somehow the humans were winning the engagement. Thorin's fourth brain began processing backup scenarios, while his primary consciousness struggled with the impossibility of the situation. "What are our losses?" 17 vessels have withdrawn for repairs. No ships destroyed, but Admiral Skelvash reports that his crews are experiencing stress-induced performance degradation. The constant threat of precision attacks has disrupted normal shipboard routines. Psychological warfare using mathematical precision and mining equipment. Thorin added this to his growing file of incomprehensible human tactics, and the orbital bombardment of their military installations. Ineffective, High Admiral. When we target their known missile silos and military bases, we discover they are empty. When we target their industrial centers, we find they have been converted to decoy facilities filled with inflatable mock-ups. The humans appear to be conducting their military operations from civilian infrastructure that they disguise as non-military facilities. They are violating the protocols of civilized warfare. Yes, High Admiral, they appear to be completely ignorant of proper military convention. They hide their weapons in schools and hospitals. They use civilian vessels to transport military supplies, and they refuse to identify their command structure for targeted elimination. Intelligence believes they have no formal command structure at all. Their military forces appear to be operating with complete autonomy within broad strategic guidelines. Thorin's confusion was becoming genuine alarm. A military force without central command was impossible to defeat through traditional means. Cut off the head, and the body died. That was the fundamental principle of galactic warfare. But humans seem to function like some sort of multi-celled organism where every cell could think independently. "Hi, Admiral," interrupted the communications officer. "We are receiving a transmission from the human government." "Display it." The hologram flickered, revealing an elderly human female in simple civilian clothing. She stood behind a wooden podium in what appeared to be a completely ordinary room, with no visible technology or military symbology. Yet something about her presence commanded immediate attention. "I am Secretary General Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Alliance," she said in calm, measured tones. "I am authorized to speak for humanity in this matter. I am High Admiral Rack Thorin, commanding the Council Enforcement Fleet. You will order the immediate surrender of all human military forces and submit to Council authority. Your continued resistance only prolongs the inevitable." The human leader's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Rack Thorin's threat assessment systems trigger involuntary alerts. "Admiral, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. You seem to think you are conquering us. You are not conquering us. You have started a war with us, and war is something humans understand very, very well. Your species possesses no significant military technology. Your largest weapons are barely capable of reaching orbital altitudes. Your defenses are primitive and easily overcome. Admiral, do you know what we call a species that believes military technology determines the outcome of wars?" Vasquez paused, her slight smile somehow more unsettling than any threat display. "We call them extinct. In our history, technologically superior forces have been defeated by primitive opponents so many times that we have entire universities devoted to studying the phenomenon." Rack Thorin's tactical computer began running probability assessments, but the results made no sense. Human claims about military history could not possibly be accurate. "You are attempting to deceive me. Superior technology always triumphs over primitive weapons. Tell that to the British Empire when they fought farmers with hunting rifles. Tell that to the Soviet Union when they invaded Afghanistan. Tell that to every superpower that thought superior firepower could substitute for understanding your enemy." Vasquez leaned forward slightly. "You made two critical errors, Admiral. First, you assumed that because our weapons are primitive, our tactics must also be primitive. Second, you threatened our children. Your emotional attachments to offspring are irrelevant to military calculations." "No, Admiral, they are the only military calculation that matters." Vasquez's expression hardened. "You see, humans have a peculiar psychological quirk. When our children are threatened, we stop thinking about acceptable losses, strategic objectives, and rational cost-benefit analysis. We enter a state that our philosophers call total war psychology and our soldiers call going berserk. We become willing to sacrifice everything, including our own lives, to eliminate the threat." Rack Thorin's threat assessment systems were now providing constant alerts, but he couldn't identify the source of the danger. The human was sitting in a room, speaking calmly, presenting no visible weapons or defenses. Yet every instinct developed over millions of years of evolution was screaming warnings. "Furthermore," Vasquez continued, "humans have another peculiar trait. We learn. Every engagement with your forces teaches us more about your technology, your tactics, and your limitations. Right now, our engineers are analyzing wreckage from your ships, our physicists are reverse engineering your energy shields, and our strategists are developing counters for every advantage you possess. Impossible. Council technology is beyond primitive understanding." Vasquez activated a display device, showing technical schematics that made Rack Thorin's primary brain temporarily shut down in shock. The humans had not only analyzed Council shield technology, they had identified 17 different methods to defeat it using materials available in any industrial economy. "This is the design for a quantum resonance torpedo that will collapse your energy shields from the inside," she explained conversationally. "This is an electromagnetic pulse weapon that will disable your computer systems while leaving ours functional, because we designed ours to be resistant to EMP, while you assumed no primitive species would possess such weapons. And this is our personal favorite, a weapon system that uses your own faster-than-light communication network to inject viral code into every ship in your fleet simultaneously." The High Admiral stared at the schematics, his multiple brains working furiously to process the impossible complexity of what he was seeing. "Your species lacks the theoretical foundation to develop such technologies. Admiral, we put theoretical physics aside and started with practical engineering. We didn't ask, How should this work according to universal principles? We asked. How can we break what they've built using whatever materials we have lying around? It's a different approach to problem solving. Rakthorin realized that the humans had spent the week since hostilities began doing something the Council had never considered. They had treated advanced technology as an engineering problem to be solved rather than an insurmountable advantage to be accepted. It was like watching a pre-spaceflight civilization successfully build faster-than-light drives using nothing but determination and creative thinking. "There is more, Admiral," Vasquez said, apparently reading his confusion. "We've been studying your fleet patterns and we've noticed something interesting. Your ships maintain perfect formation, respond to commands with mechanical precision, and follow tactical doctrines with absolute consistency. Very impressive, also very predictable." She activated another display, showing a three-dimensional projection of the Council fleet surrounding Earth. "Your formation is optimized for maximum coverage and overlapping fields of fire. It's textbook perfect. It's also exactly what our computers predicted you would do, because military organizations tend to follow logical patterns." The projection shifted, showing human ships, crude, barely functional vessels that looked like they had been built in someone's garage, emerging from apparently empty space. They materialized inside the Council formation, having somehow approached completely undetected. "Our ships are primitive by your standards," Vasquez acknowledged, "but they have one advantage your sophisticated vessels lack. They're so crude that your sensors don't recognize them as threats. They register as space debris, industrial equipment, or natural phenomena. By the time your computers realize they're looking at warships, they're already inside your defensive perimeter." Rakthorin watched in horror as the human vessels, ugly, asymmetrical things that violated every principle of proper ship design, began targeting his fleet with weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate Council shields. Except they weren't trying to penetrate the shields. They were bypassing them entirely using techniques that made no theoretical sense but worked perfectly in practice. "How?" he managed to ask. "Admiral, your shields protect against energy weapons and high-speed projectiles. They don't protect against slow-moving objects that drift through them like space dust and then explode once they're inside. They don't protect against computer viruses transmitted by laser communication. And they definitely don't protect against weapons that use your own shield generators as components in their targeting systems." The tactical display showed Council ships beginning to experience cascading system failures as human weapon systems exploited vulnerabilities that no sane species would have thought to target. Who uses shield generators as targeting components? Who builds computer viruses specifically to attack military-grade quantum encryption? Who treats space warfare like an engineering puzzle to be solved with whatever random materials happen to be available? Humans, apparently. Humans did all of these things. "You have 15 minutes to withdraw your ships to a safe distance," Vasquez announced. "After that, we activate the devices we've been installing on your hulls while your crews were distracted by our primitive attacks." "What devices?" "Mining charges, Admiral. We've been attaching them to your heat sinks during the debris bombardments. You've been so focused on the kinetic impactors that you didn't notice the small packages that stuck to your ships instead of bouncing off. Each charge is precisely placed to cause maximum damage to life support systems when detonated." Rakthorin's tactical officers began reporting exactly what the human leader had described. Small, crude explosive devices attached to critical systems throughout the fleet. The charges were so primitive that they barely registered on sensors, but they were positioned with surgical precision to cripple each ship when activated. "This is impossible," he said weakly. "Your species lacks the capability for such complex operations." "Admiral, you keep saying things are impossible after we've already done them. It's time to update your assumptions." Vasquez's smile returned, and this time there was no mistaking the predatory nature of it. "Humans don't fight wars the way you expect because we don't think the way you expect. You see obstacles, we see engineering problems. You see rules, we see suggestions. You see superior technology, we see reverse engineering opportunities." The communication ended, leaving Rakthorin staring at a tactical display that showed his supposedly invincible fleet transformed into a collection of carefully prepared targets. Every ship could be destroyed at the human's convenience, using weapons so crude that his computers had classified them as industrial accidents rather than military threats. He gave the order to withdraw. knowing that he would have to explain to the Council how a primitive species had defeated the most advanced military force in galactic history using mining equipment, computer viruses, and what appeared to be weaponized stubbornness. The humans were right about one thing: war was something they understood very, very well. They just understood it in ways that made no sense to anyone else in the galaxy. As his fleet retreated to a safer distance, Rakthorin began composing his report and wondering how to explain that humanity had just taught the galaxy's greatest military power a lesson in creative problem-solving. The Council had started this conflict, expecting to demonstrate their superiority. Instead, they had given humans a masterclass in advanced technology and motivated them to find ways to turn that technology against its creators. It was, the High Admiral realized with growing dread, exactly the kind of catastrophic mistake that species made right before they became historical footnotes. The humans were no longer the problem. The problem was what the humans were going to do with everything they had learned. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the ancient Chamber of Voices, a crystalline amphitheater that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations over 10 million years. Representatives from 2,000 species filled the curved tiers, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, telepathic bursts, and electromagnetic pulses that the universal translators struggled to parse. At the center of the chamber, Supreme Counselor Vex Narlith raised her 6 arms for silence. The ancient Etherian's body was more energy than matter, her thoughts transmitted through modulated quantum fluctuations that conveyed authority accumulated over millennia of galactic governance. "We convene in crisis." Her voice resonated through every mind present, regardless of species or communication method. "The primitive humans have achieved what no species in recorded history has accomplished. They have forced a Council enforcement fleet to retreat without deploying a single weapon system that our databases recognize as militarily significant." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. Representative Krakvos of the hegemony, his metallic form shifting colors to express skepticism, transmitted his objection through direct neural interface. "Impossible. Our intelligence networks confirm that humans possess no energy weapons beyond basic laser systems, no faster-than-light combat capability, and no defensive technology that can withstand Council-grade armaments." Yet High Admiral Rakthorin's fleet was forced to withdraw after suffering crippling damage from weapons systems our computers classified as industrial equipment, Vex Narlith replied. "Display the tactical analysis." The chamber's central hologram activated, showing a 3-dimensional recreation of the engagement. Council representatives watched in stunned silence as primitive human vessels, things that looked like they had been assembled in scrapyards, systematically disabled advanced warships using tactics that violated every known principle of military science. "They used mining charges as precision weapons," announced the tactical analysis system. "They employed electromagnetic pulse devices disguised as communications equipment. They infiltrated our computer networks using viral code transmitted through standard diplomatic channels. Most disturbing, they demonstrated the ability to reverse engineer and counter our most advanced defensive systems within standard time cycles." Representative Sith Kaller of the Void Walkers, her shadow form rippling with anxiety, projected her concerns directly into the Assembly's shared consciousness. "How did they penetrate our sensor networks undetected?" "By building ships so crude that our computers couldn't classify them as military threats," the analysis system replied. "Human vessels were constructed using materials and methods that fall below the threshold parameters for threat assessment. Our sensors registered them as space debris, industrial waste, or natural phenomena until they were already within our defensive perimeters." The implications hit the Assembly like a psychic shockwave. Every species in the galaxy had spent millennia perfecting military technology, creating weapons and defenses of extraordinary sophistication. The humans had simply ignored sophisticated technology entirely and built weapons so primitive that advanced sensors couldn't recognize them as weapons. Furthermore, the analysis continued, humans appear to treat technological advancement not as a barrier to overcome, but as a resource to exploit. Every engagement with our forces has provided them with additional technical data, which they process and weaponize with unprecedented speed. Supreme Counselor Vex Narlith's quantum field fluctuated in patterns that conveyed deep concern. Explain the current threat assessment. Critical and escalating. Human engineering teams have successfully reverse-engineered Council shield technology, faster-than-light communication protocols, and energy weapon systems. However, rather than simply duplicating our technology, they have been modifying it in ways that suggest a fundamentally different approach to technological development. The hologram shifted to display human modifications of Council technology. What the assembly saw defied every principle of proper engineering. Crude human components integrated with sophisticated alien systems in ways that should have been impossible but clearly worked. They are treating our technology like components in a construction kit, observed Representative Clithvarn of the Synthetic Collective, his mechanical voice carrying notes of what might have been admiration. Rather than attempting to understand the theoretical foundations, they identify functional elements and incorporate them into their own designs using methods that bypass traditional limitations. Exactly, confirmed the analysis system. Humans appear to approach technology as an engineering problem rather than a scientific discipline. They ask, how can we make this work for us, instead of, how does this work according to established principles? The result is hybrid systems that function effectively while violating numerous physical laws. Representative Korth Nexus of the Telepathic Confederation transmitted a wave of confusion that resonated through every psychically sensitive species in the chamber. How do they violate physical laws? They don't violate them so much as ignore them, came the reply. Human modifications create localized areas where physical laws operate differently than they do in the rest of the universe. Our theoretical physicists cannot explain how this is possible, but empirical evidence confirms that human-modified technology functions in ways that our models predict should be impossible. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives struggled to process this information. Species that had devoted millions of years to understanding the universe found themselves confronted with creatures that simply rearranged reality to suit their immediate needs. Supreme Counselor Vex Narlith imposed order through a burst of directed quantum energy that temporarily overwhelmed the Assembly's communication systems. What is the current status of human military capability? Unknown and increasing exponentially, the analysis system reported. Every interaction with Council forces has resulted in immediate technological advancement for human civilization. They have converted industrial equipment into orbital weapons platforms, transformed communication networks into cyber warfare systems, and weaponized civilian infrastructure in ways that make traditional military targeting impossible. Elaborate on the weaponization of civilian infrastructure. Humans do not maintain a clear distinction between military and civilian resources. Their schools conduct weapons research, their hospitals manufacture military equipment, and their entertainment industry produces psychological warfare programs that are transmitted throughout Council space via captured communication networks. Representative Ithak Morn of the warrior clans, his scaled hide flushing with combat stimulants, roared his confusion. Entertainment industry? They wage war through entertainment. Affirmative, human movies, television programs, and social media content are being broadcast on Council frequencies. Initial analysis suggested these were harmless cultural exports. However, Council personnel exposed to human entertainment media show measurable changes in behavior patterns, including increased questioning of authority, reduced compliance with standard protocols, and development of what humans term independent thinking. The implications struck the Assembly like a physical blow. Humans weren't just fighting a military war. They were conducting a comprehensive cultural assault designed to undermine the very foundations of Council civilization. They were teaching Council citizens to think like humans. What specific changes are being observed? Vex Narlith demanded. Council military personnel are beginning to exhibit creativity in problem-solving, adaptability to unexpected situations, and resistance to standard psychological conditioning. Several species have reported that their young are asking questions about Council authority that have no programmed responses. Most disturbing, some Council scientists have begun conducting research using human methodologies that prioritize practical results over theoretical consistency. Representative Skeltharn of the Hive Minds transmitted a pulse of pure terror that temporarily disrupted the chamber's neural networks. They are teaching individualism to collective consciousness species. This could destroy the fundamental basis of our civilization. Worse, the analysis system continued. Humans appear to be deliberately targeting the psychological foundations of council society. Their entertainment media promotes concepts such as personal freedom, democratic governance, and the right of individuals to challenge established authority. Exposure to these concepts is causing measurable degradation in the obedience conditioning that maintains social stability throughout council space. Supreme Counselor Vex Narlith realized they were facing something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that waged war not just against military forces, but against the entire conceptual framework that held their civilization together. Humans weren't trying to conquer the council, they were trying to convert it. Military recommendations, she asked. Unknown, traditional military doctrine assumes that superior technology and overwhelming force will compel enemy surrender. Humans appear to treat superior enemy technology as a learning opportunity rather than a deterrent. They respond to overwhelming force by becoming more creative and determined rather than more compliant. Standard psychological warfare techniques are ineffective because humans appear to enjoy conflict and treat adversity as motivation for innovation. What about economic warfare? Ineffective, humans have demonstrated the ability to convert any available materials into functional technology. They have built orbital weapons platforms using mining equipment, created faster-than-light communication systems using entertainment broadcasting equipment, and developed advanced computer systems using what they term video game consoles. Economic restrictions only force them to become more creative in resource utilization. Representative Vex Skylith of the Commercial Federation, her crystalline form flickering with financial anxiety, transmitted her concerns. What about cutting off their supply chains? Humans don't appear to have supply chains in any traditional sense. Each human settlement operates as an independent technological development center capable of producing whatever equipment is needed using locally available resources. They share information freely between settlements, creating a distributed research and development network that cannot be disrupted by targeting specific facilities. The assembly fell into stunned silence as the full scope of the problem became clear. Humans had created a civilization that was essentially immune to every form of warfare the galaxy had ever developed. They couldn't be defeated militarily because they turned every attack into a learning experience. They couldn't be conquered economically because they could build advanced technology from garbage. They couldn't be controlled psychologically because they actually enjoyed fighting impossible odds. What do you recommend? Vex Narlith asked the analysis system. Immediate cessation of all hostile activities against human civilization, followed by formal diplomatic recognition and establishment of peaceful relations. Explain. Continued conflict with humans will result in exponential advancement of their technological capabilities and further degradation of council authority structures. Every engagement teaches them more about our weaknesses while forcing them to develop new capabilities. The longer this conflict continues, the more dangerous humans become, and the more likely they are to destabilize the fundamental basis of galactic civilization. Representative Gorth Klex of the Fanatic Purifiers, his biomechanical form bristling with weapon systems, transmitted aggressive dissent. Impossible. The Council does not negotiate with primitives. We will deploy additional fleets and overwhelm them with superior numbers. Additional fleets will only provide humans with more technology to reverse engineer and more opportunities to develop counter-strategies, the analysis system warned. Current projections suggest that deployment of additional council forces will result in humans achieving technological parity within 1 standard year, followed by technological superiority within 5 standard years. How is that possible? Humans learn exponentially. Each engagement provides them with information that they immediately share with their entire species through their global communication network. They process this information using collaborative research methods that allow millions of individuals to contribute to problem-solving simultaneously. The result is technological development at rates that exceed anything in recorded galactic history. Supreme Counselor Vex Narlith's quantum field began displaying the complex patterns that indicated deep strategic thinking. The Council faced an enemy that became stronger with every battle, smarter with every encounter, and more dangerous with every attempt to defeat them. "One more question," she said. "What happens if we simply ignore them and hope they ignore us?" "Impossible. Human civilization appears to be expanding rapidly in all directions. They are establishing colonies throughout local space, making contact with non-council species, and sharing their technological innovations freely with anyone willing to trade or communicate. Within 50 standard years, human influence will encompass a significant portion of the galaxy. And they will teach other species to think like humans." "Correct. The ultimate threat is not human military capability, but human ideas. They represent a completely different approach to civilization that prioritizes individual creativity, democratic cooperation, and adaptive problem-solving over centralized control and technological stagnation. If these ideas spread throughout the galaxy, the Council's authority structure becomes irrelevant." Vexnarlith realized that the humans had already won the war, though they might not know it yet. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by forcing the Council to confront the fundamental limitations of their own civilization. The question was no longer how to defeat the humans, but how to survive in a galaxy where human ideas were spreading like a virus. The emergency session continued for 18 more hours as representatives struggled to find solutions to an unsolvable problem. By the end, only one conclusion was possible. The galaxy was about to change in ways that none of them could predict or control. The humans had started something that couldn't be stopped, and the Council's age of absolute authority was coming to an end. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Asterisk-used Defiance Asterisk, watching through the viewport as something impossible unfolded in the space around Earth. What had started as humanity's desperate last stand had become something no military strategist could have predicted: the galaxy's first multi-species rebellion against the Galactic Council. "Ma'am, we're receiving another request to join the coalition," reported Lieutenant Webb, now promoted to communications chief after surviving their first contact with alien civilization 6 months ago. "This time it's from the Korthani Mining Collective. They're offering 17 heavy industrial ships and complete technical specifications for their asteroid processing systems." Chen shook her head in amazement. "That makes what, 57 different species now?" 58 if we count the Etherian dissidents, but they're technically still Council members, so intelligence isn't sure how to classify them," Webb replied. "Admiral Rodriguez wants to know if we should be worried about operational security with this many different groups involved." "Tell the Admiral that operational security stopped being relevant when we started broadcasting our technical manuals on every frequency in known space," Chen said. "The whole point is to make sure everyone knows what we're doing and how to do it themselves." It had been humanity's most radical strategic decision. Instead of hoarding their innovations, they shared everything freely with any species willing to listen. Human engineering techniques, tactical doctrines, and technological modifications were transmitted openly throughout the galaxy, turning every recipient into a potential ally and every alliance into a force multiplier. The results had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Species throughout Council space were discovering that human methods could solve problems they had struggled with for millennia. More importantly, they were learning that the Council's technological superiority was largely an illusion maintained by restricting access to information and discouraging independent research. "Ma'am, the hegemony delegation is requesting permission to come aboard," announced Tactical Officer Martinez, who had been promoted after her creative work with improvised nuclear weapons had become the foundation for humanity's entire space combat doctrine. "Their lead representative says they have a proposal that could end the war." Chen frowned. The hegemony had been among humanity's most aggressive opponents, second only to the Council itself in terms of resources committed to the conflict. "Any idea what they want to discuss?" "No, ma'am, but they're transmitting on channels that our Etherian allies say are reserved for formal diplomatic surrender." That was interesting. Chen had been expecting individual hegemony worlds to eventually switch sides, but she hadn't anticipated the entire faction approaching them for negotiations. "Grant them permission to board, but keep weapons systems active and maintain full security protocols." 20 minutes later, Chen found herself in the ship's main conference room, facing beings she had only seen before as enemies on tactical displays. The hegemony representatives were even more unsettling in person. shape-shifting entities of living metal that flowed and reformed constantly, making it impossible to maintain eye contact or read their body language. Their leader, who introduced itself as Prime Negotiator Flux Terminus, spoke through direct neural transmission that the Universal Translator rendered as formal, almost ceremonial language. Commander Chen, we come seeking terms for cessation of hostilities between the hegemony and the human alliance. I'm listening, Chen replied carefully, but I should point out that we've never considered ourselves at war with the hegemony specifically. Our conflict is with anyone who threatens human colonies or tries to prevent peaceful species from making their own choices about government and technology. Flux Terminus's form rippled in patterns that might have indicated surprise. You do not seek conquest of hegemony space. Why would we want to conquer you? We've got enough problems managing our own territory, and conquest would just create more enemies we'd have to fight later. We're much more interested in trade agreements and technology sharing. Another ripple, this one suggesting profound confusion. But you have defeated our military forces, disrupted our supply networks, and caused widespread social unrest throughout our territory. These are the actions of a conquering power. Chen began to understand the disconnect. We weren't trying to defeat your military forces. We were trying to keep them from attacking our colonies. We weren't trying to disrupt your supply networks. We were sharing technology that made your civilians less dependent on centralized distribution systems. And we definitely weren't trying to cause social unrest. We were just broadcasting entertainment programs and educational materials. Yet these actions have resulted in 17 hegemony worlds declaring independence, 43 colonial administrations demanding democratic reforms, and the complete collapse of our centralized command structure, Flux Terminus replied. Our civilization is experiencing unprecedented changes that threaten the stability of our entire species. Is that bad? Chen asked genuinely. From our perspective, those changes look like signs of healthy social development. People are taking control of their own lives, developing their own technology, and making their own decisions about government. That sounds pretty positive to us. The hegemony delegation exchanged what appeared to be private communications before Flux Terminus responded. Your species appears to consider social chaos a desirable state. Not chaos, Chen corrected. Freedom. There's a difference. Chaos is when nobody knows what's happening and everybody's fighting everybody else. Freedom is when people can choose their own direction and work together voluntarily toward common goals. These concepts are difficult for us to process, Flux Terminus admitted. Hegemony civilization is based on perfect unity and centralized coordination. Individual decision-making creates inefficiencies and conflicts that reduce overall productivity. Chen leaned back in her chair, beginning to see the real scope of the problem. The conflict hadn't just been about military superiority. It had been about fundamentally different approaches to civilization itself. Humans valued individual creativity and voluntary cooperation, while the hegemony valued unified efficiency and coordinated effort. Look, she said, we're not trying to destroy your civilization. We're just sharing methods that work for us and letting other people decide for themselves whether they want to try them. If your people prefer centralized coordination, that's fine with us. But if some of them want to try democratic self-governance, that should be their choice to make. But individual choice leads to disagreement, conflict, and reduced efficiency, Flux Terminus protested. Sometimes, Chen acknowledged. It also leads to innovation, adaptation, and creative problem-solving. Different approaches work better for different situations. The key is having the freedom to choose the approach that works best for your specific circumstances. Another long pause for internal consultation. Then Flux Terminus asked the question that Chen realized was at the heart of the entire galactic conflict. How do you maintain social stability when individuals are free to make choices that conflict with collective needs? Chen smiled. We argue about it. A lot. Democracy is basically a system for having productive arguments about important decisions. Sometimes the arguments get pretty heated, but in the end, we usually figure out solutions that most people can live with. And if no consensus is possible, then we agree to disagree and try different approaches in different places and see which ones work better. Competition between ideas, rather than competition between military forces. The concept appeared to cause significant processing difficulties for the hegemony representatives. Chen could practically see them struggling to understand how a civilization could function without absolute unity and centralized control. We have observed that human communities frequently experience internal conflicts, Flux Terminus noted. Sure, people disagree about things, but disagreement doesn't have to mean warfare. Most of our internal conflicts are resolved through negotiation, compromise, or simply allowing different groups to try different approaches and compare results. This seems inefficient. In the short term, maybe. In the long term, it's incredibly efficient because it means we're always experimenting with new solutions and learning from both successes and failures. A system that allows for lots of small mistakes tends to avoid catastrophic big mistakes. Chen could see the moment when understanding began to dawn in the alien delegation. Their forms shifted into configurations that suggested profound realization. You are not attempting to impose human governance on other species, Flux Terminus said slowly. You are offering alternatives and allowing each group to choose what works best for their circumstances. Exactly. We're not missionaries trying to convert everyone to humanity. We're just sharing what we've learned and hoping other people will share what they've learned with us. The more different approaches we have available, the better equipped we are to handle whatever challenges come up. And you do not require other species to adopt human methods in order to maintain peaceful relations. Of course not. We're happy to trade and cooperate with anyone who's willing to treat us as equals and respect our right to self-determination. How you organize your own society is your business, as long as you're not trying to force your organizational methods on people who don't want them. Flux Terminus's form stabilized into what Chen had learned to recognize as a formal diplomatic configuration. The hegemony is prepared to propose a mutual non-interference agreement. We will cease all attempts to impose centralized coordination on human territories and request that humans cease broadcasting materials that promote individualistic thinking in hegemony space. Chen shook her head. I'm afraid we can't agree to that second part. We don't restrict information flow, and we're not going to start now. But here's what we can offer. We'll make sure our broadcasts clearly label the content as representing human perspectives, not universal truths. People who want to hear alternative viewpoints can listen, and people who prefer your traditional methods can ignore them. This proposal would allow hegemony citizens to voluntarily expose themselves to potentially destabilizing ideas. Yes, it would, because we believe people have the right to make their own choices about what ideas they want to consider, even if those choices might be mistakes. Freedom includes the freedom to be wrong. The hegemony delegation engaged in what appeared to be intense internal debate before Flux Terminus responded. This concept is deeply troubling to us, but we acknowledge that attempting to suppress human information distribution has proven both impossible and counterproductive. We are prepared to accept this condition in exchange for formal recognition of hegemony territorial sovereignty. Deal, Chen said immediately, with the understanding that if any hegemony worlds decide they want to try different governmental approaches, we'll support their right to self-determination, even if those changes destabilize our civilization. Especially then, a civilization that can't survive voluntary change probably needs to change. As the negotiations continued, Chen realized they were establishing the framework for something unprecedented in galactic history, a peace treaty based on mutual respect rather than submission to superior force. The humans had won their war not by defeating their enemies, but by convincing them that war itself was unnecessary. The galaxy was about to discover that the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their weapons or their tactics. It was their ideas about freedom, democracy, and the right of every sentient being to choose their own destiny. Those ideas, once released, could never be contained. They would spread from species to species, world to world, until the entire galaxy was transformed by the radical notion that people should be free to determine their own fate. The Council's age of absolute control was ending not with military defeat, but with the gradual realization that their authority had always been an illusion. Real power came from the willing cooperation of free individuals, not from the forced obedience of subjects. Humans had started a revolution without even trying, simply by being themselves and sharing what they had learned about building societies based on voluntary cooperation rather than involuntary submission. The war was ending, but the real victory was just beginning. 5 years after first contact, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the newly constructed Galactic Assembly, addressing representatives from over 3,000 species in the galaxy's first truly democratic interstellar government. The massive station that housed the assembly was itself a testament to the changes that had swept through known space, a collaborative construction project that incorporated architectural elements, technologies, and design philosophies from hundreds of different civilizations. Unlike the old Council's Chamber of Voices, which had been designed to emphasize hierarchy and control, the Assembly Hall was built around the principle of equality. Every representative had the same sized platform, the same quality of translation equipment, and the same access to the central communication network. It was chaotic, noisy, and wonderfully inefficient, everything the old galactic order had tried to prevent. 5 years ago, Vasquez began, her words translated into thousands of different forms of communication. The galaxy was controlled by beings who believed that peace could only be maintained through submission to superior force. Today, we gather as equals to solve problems through cooperation rather than domination. A ripple of agreement passed through the assembly in the form of clicks, whistles, telepathic bursts, and electromagnetic pulses. The universal translator had been upgraded with human-developed algorithms that could interpret emotional content as well as literal meaning, allowing for much more nuanced communication between species. But let's be honest about how we got here, Vasquez continued. Humanity didn't set out to revolutionize galactic civilization. We just wanted to be left alone to build our colonies and explore the universe. The revolution happened because people throughout the galaxy were already hungry for alternatives to authoritarian control. They just needed to see that alternatives were possible. Representative Clicksforth of the former Council species, now calling themselves the Reformed Crystalline Federation, projected their thoughts through the translation network. Ambassador Vasquez speaks truly. My people had maintained rigid social hierarchies for millennia because we believed they were necessary for stability. Exposure to human organizational methods demonstrated that stability could be achieved through voluntary cooperation rather than enforced obedience. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present that Clicksforth, who had once threatened to impound humanity's first contact ship, was now one of the strongest advocates for democratic reform. The transformation hadn't been immediate. It had taken months of cultural exchange and gradual experimentation before the crystalline species began adopting human-inspired governmental structures. The key insight, added prime researcher Flux Terminus of the Hegemony Scientific Collective, was that different organizational methods work better for different circumstances and different species. Rather than seeking one universal system of government, we have learned to treat governance as an ongoing experiment with multiple approaches being tested simultaneously. That had been humanity's most significant contribution to galactic civilization. The idea that there didn't have to be one correct way to organize society. Different species could try different approaches, share their results, and adopt whatever methods worked best for their particular needs and values. The results had been remarkable. The hegemony's centralized coordination worked beautifully for large-scale engineering projects, but poorly for creative endeavors. So they had developed hybrid systems that used centralized planning for infrastructure while allowing individual creativity for art, entertainment, and scientific research. The crystalline species had discovered that their natural hierarchy was actually more flexible than they had believed, and had reformed their government to allow for elected leadership positions while maintaining their traditional social structures. What about species that preferred the old system? Asked Representative Yithkaller of the Void Walker Confederation. Not every civilization wanted to experiment with democratic reforms. And that's fine, Vasquez replied. The new galactic charter explicitly protects the right of each species to organize their own internal affairs as they see fit. The only requirement is that they respect the right of other species to make different choices. It had taken nearly 2 years of negotiation to work out the details, but the final agreement was elegantly simple. Every species retained complete sovereignty over their own territory and citizens, but no species could impose their governmental systems on others or prevent voluntary cultural exchange. Trade, communication, and migration were open to all, but participation was entirely voluntary. The old council species had been among the most resistant to these changes, but even they had eventually come to see the advantages. Without the enormous military and bureaucratic expenses required to maintain control over thousands of unwilling subject species, they had been able to redirect resources toward technological development and cultural enrichment. Most discovered that their civilizations were actually more productive and innovative when they focused on internal development rather than external control. The most surprising result, observed Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as humanity's chief science liaison, has been the acceleration of technological development throughout the galaxy. When species started sharing information freely instead of hoarding it for competitive advantage, the rate of innovation increased exponentially. That had been completely unexpected. The old system had assumed that technological advancement required centralized research coordination and careful control of information distribution. In reality, the opposite was true. Innovation flourished when researchers could communicate freely across species and cultural boundaries, building on each other's work without bureaucratic restrictions. Human universities now hosted students from hundreds of different species, while human researchers worked in laboratories throughout the galaxy. The cross-pollination of ideas had led to breakthroughs that no single species could have achieved alone. Hegemony coordination methods combined with crystalline mathematical precision and human creative problem-solving had solved engineering challenges that had puzzled galactic civilization for millennia. Which brings us to today's agenda, Vasquez announced. We need to discuss the exploration proposal that's been submitted by the Coalition of Young Species. The coalition represented civilizations that had achieved spaceflight within the last 1,000 years, newcomers by galactic standards, but full members of the Assembly nonetheless. Their proposal was ambitious, a joint exploration mission to investigate reports of intelligent life in the galaxy's outer rim, beyond the borders of known space. The proposal raises important questions about how we approach contact with previously unknown civilizations, noted Representative Korth Nexus of the Telepathic Confederation. What protocols should we follow? What principles should guide our interactions? The question sparked intense debate throughout the Assembly. Some species favored cautious observation and gradual contact, while others preferred immediate diplomatic engagement. Military-minded species wanted to assess potential threats, while trade-oriented civilizations were eager to establish commercial relationships. I think, said Commander Marcus Webb, now serving as humanity's military liaison, we need to remember what we learned from our own first contact experience. The most important thing isn't having perfect protocols. It's approaching other species with respect and genuine curiosity rather than assumptions about superiority or inferiority. That sparked general agreement. The galaxy's experience with humanity had demonstrated that peaceful first contact was possible even between species with radically different technologies and social structures, but only if both sides approached the encounter with open minds and willingness to learn. Perhaps, suggested Flux Terminus, we should develop multiple contact protocols designed for different circumstances, rather than seeking a single universal approach. Some species might prefer formal diplomatic contact, while others might respond better to cultural exchange or scientific collaboration. And some might want to be left alone entirely, added Clixforth. We should respect that choice as well, even if it means missing opportunities for beneficial interaction. The debate continued for hours, with representatives proposing various modifications and refinements to the exploration protocols. It was messy, time-consuming, and occasionally heated, but it was also genuinely democratic, with every species having an equal voice in decisions that would affect the entire galaxy. Eventually, they reached consensus on a framework that balanced exploration with respect for alien autonomy. Multiple small expeditions using different contact approaches, with strict guidelines for withdrawing if contacted species showed signs of distress or hostility. The goal was to learn about galactic neighbors rather than to expand territorial control or extract resources. As the session concluded, Vasquez reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate encounter between humanity and the Galactic Council. The galaxy was messier now, less predictable and occasionally chaotic. It was also more innovative, more peaceful, and more prosperous than it had ever been under centralized control. Ambassador, asked a young reporter from the Galactic Broadcasting Network, itself a human innovation that had spread throughout known space, do you think the new system is sustainable? Some critics argue that democratic governments are inherently unstable and that will eventually see a return to authoritarian control. Vasquez smiled. Democracy isn't stable in the sense of being unchanging. It's stable in the sense of being adaptable. When problems arise, democratic systems can evolve to address them without requiring violent revolution or external conquest. That flexibility is what makes democratic civilization resilient rather than rigid. And if some species decide they prefer authoritarian government, then that's their choice to make, as long as they don't try to impose authoritarianism on others. The whole point is that people should be free to choose the type of government they want to live under. As representatives began departing for their home systems, many stopped to thank the human delegation for their role in transforming galactic civilization. But Vasquez knew the truth. Humans hadn't transformed anything. They had simply demonstrated that alternatives to authoritarian control were possible and given other species the confidence to experiment with those alternatives. The real heroes of the Galactic Revolution were the countless individuals from hundreds of species who had chosen to try new approaches despite the risks, who had worked to build better societies despite the difficulties, and who had refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. Humanity's gift to the galaxy hadn't been superior technology or military strategy. It had been the simple but revolutionary idea that people could govern themselves, that cooperation was more powerful than domination, and that diversity of approaches was a strength rather than a weakness. The old Galactic Council had ruled through fear and claimed that their control was necessary for peace and stability. The new Galactic Assembly was proving every day that real peace and stability came from voluntary cooperation between free peoples who chose to work together toward common goals. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly the point. Change, adaptation, and continuous improvement weren't bugs in the democratic system. They were features that kept civilizations healthy and growing rather than stagnant and declining. As humanity's representatives departed for Earth, they carried with them reports of new discoveries, new technologies, and new friendships that would benefit both humanity and their alien allies. But more importantly, they carried the knowledge that the universe was full of beings who shared humanity's belief in freedom, cooperation, and the endless potential for positive change. The war against humanity had ended almost before it began, not because humans were superior fighters, but because they had offered something more valuable than victory. They had offered hope for a better way of living together in an uncertain but wonderful universe. The galaxy had learned that, when dealing with humans, the only sure thing was that they would find ways to turn every challenge into an opportunity, every enemy into a potential friend, and every problem into a chance to build something better than what existed before. Good luck trying to predict what they would do next. Even the humans themselves weren't entirely sure.